started here. Welcome everybody to Peter White Public Library. My name is Marty Atkins and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for the library. That's one of the many things that I do in my life. I just want to welcome everybody who's joining us via YouTube. I have a group to mention and thank. They are the Friends of Peter White Public Library. They paid for all of the live streaming equipment that we have. The Friends are wonderful. We couldn't do probably 95% of the stuff that we do here at the library without their assistance. So go down to the bookstore downstairs, the used bookstore, go there. Support your local bookstore, which is right around the corner from the library, Snowbound Books as well. So I'm just going to make you aware of a couple things that are upcoming this week, and well, actually now it's next week at the library. If you have signed up for the Craft Magic series, Felt Magic with Jody Trost for next Monday, that is happening at 6:30 p.m. I believe that the registration is full, but you could, if you're interested in that, you can go into the library page and check that out. And just to make you aware too, if you were planning on coming to the presentation for the Marquette Alzheimer's Association next Tuesday, we've had to postpone that. So there's a new date that's coming for that. And next Wednesday, we have a celebration of John Lennon's birthday with Russell Thorburn and Patrick Booth and Dylan Trost. The musicians are going to be joining Russell, who's going to be reading some of his poetry. That starts at 6:30 p.m. downstairs in the community room. And believe it or not, John Lennon would have been 84 this year. I just did the math on that one. So, and then next Thursday we have our monthly meeting of the Marquette Poets Circle. That starts at 6:30. It goes from 6:30 to 7:15. We workshop poems, so you can bring anything that you want to, and we'll look at it and critique it and give you some suggestions. And then at 7:15, the open mic starts, and that runs from 7:15 to 8 p.m. You can come and do anything you want. Tell a story, read a poem, sing a song. We don't care. Tell a joke. And then next week, Friday, is our docu-cinema. And in honor of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we are showing a documentary called The Cancer Journals. And basically what the movie is it's a reading of Audre Lorde's groundbreaking memoir, The Cancer Journals. And all of these survivors and healthcare providers read sections of that during the documentary. And it's a really powerful, powerful film. So I encourage you all to come to that. So lots of great stuff coming up. I have flyers back there if you're interested in the other October programs. But you are here tonight for Steve Amick, so let me tell you a little bit about him. Steve is the author of You Shall See the Beautiful Things, a novel and a nocturne, which he's going to be reading from and talking about tonight. He's also published 2 novels with Pantheon at Division of Penguin Random House, Nothing But a Smile, and The Lake, the River, and Other Lake, which was a Washington Post Book of the Year, a Book Sense pick, and was cited by the Encyclopedia Britannica. I think this is amazing. Britannica Book of the Year as one of the standout debuts of 2005. And both were Michigan notable books as well. And his shorter fictions have appeared in Playboy, McSweeney, Zoetrope. Is it Zoetrope or Zoetrope? I can never remember.
I say Zoetrope.
Zoetrope?
I could be wrong.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Zoetrope, All Stories, Southern Review, Michigan Quarterly Review, and also on NPR. So lots of wonderful things. Steve received his BA in English writing from St. Lawrence and an MFA in creative writing from George Mason University in 1991. He studied with Richard Bausch and Susan Shreve. He worked on the editorial staff. We were talking about this just a little while ago of Phoebe, the magazine from George Mason as well. And he has taught also in a few MFA programs at Northwestern and Pacific universities. And he lives in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, where he was born, and I love this, in the UP, where he was reborn. So please give a warm Peter White Public Library welcome to Steve Amick.
Thanks a lot. Is this a good height for me, or should I?
Let's put it up a little higher for that. I guess you're a little taller than me.
Yes.
Hopefully that's going to work. There.
Well, I want to thank Marty and Peter White for having me. It's really great to be here, and I mean here, but also now lately in the UP in general. I live in Ann Arbor technically, but I'm finding that I'm spending much more of my time, much more of the calendar actually, in a place that we just built down in Manistee, and right on Lake Michigan, where I'm hoping in coming years to start having some little writing retreats called the Writing Rock out on this weird, treacherous, rocky point we have, and inviting friends to have readings in a little area we have, and maybe do some fun stuff down there. For anybody familiar with my other books, this is really a departure. It's, for one thing, it's not very, it doesn't take place in Michigan, although Bonnie Jo Campbell told me really recently, this is really kind of a Michigan book. I think she means because of all the water and sort of the feeling of it. She wrote some great things for the jacket, but this was just a comment she made to me that it feels sort of like a Michigan book. I don't want to say it's based on Wink and Blink and a Nod. It's more like it's constructed around the spine of Wink and Blink and a Nod. I'll explain that a little bit better. Does everybody know Wink and Blink and a Nod? I'm surprised sometimes people don't. Out there, if people don't, it's just to remind you, Wink and Blink and a Nod one night, sailed off on a wooden shoe, sailed on a river of crystal light into a sea of dew. And it was Eugene Field, an American poet. It's also called Dutch Lullaby, and it was written, published light verse in 1889. So it's going to be a little different. This book is part historical novel, part buddy story. My old editor at Pantheon described it at one point as a novel for poets, and then she later said, and you somehow managed to disguise a little a romantic comedy in there. So it's a number of things. It's also very rule breaking in a lot of ways, but it's kind of a high concept because I'll explain it, I guess, a little later. But the way it's constructed is a little odd. It's basically, though, just a story of three fishermen in the historically accurate fishing village of Stendingen, which is on the edge of The Hague in the Netherlands in 1889. And there's some magic realism in it necessarily because it does follow some of the narrative of the poem. They're not in the wooden shoe, but there's some supernatural things that are happening. Essentially, it's just a story of three men banding together to, in sort of desperate times, build a smaller herring boat, which is a design called a picaroon. It's a real thing, though it's not in real life magical. It's used primarily in the Devon village of Clovelly on the western side of England, and it's just one or two people could use it. Versus what they did in the Netherlands, which were these huge, hefty things, boomshoes for one, the things that look a little like a wooden shoe, and you need teams of oxen, and you have to push it out in the ocean. And then they had herring boosters, which were basically factory ships out in the North Sea. So it's a real different thing. They're looking for a way to do this together. The three characters follow sort of the names of Wink and Blink and a Nod, and have sort of personalities that have something to do with those words. Vinken van Winkle is the first one, Vin, or Vink. He's a war deserter, opium addict, who is not supposed to be home, but he's home from the Acha War in Sumatra. He's trying to raise money to keep moving west, possibly to America. He's getting away from a lot of his terrors. He used to be this real cavalier joker guy, good with the ladies kind of guy, very ironic and glib. And he's also, so he still has that quality, and also because he doesn't want to face a lot of things, he wants to keep things kind of close to the vest. He sort of metaphorically is speaking out of the side of his mouth. So the three characters in here graphically have punctuation that denotes their personality, and so he has brackets, and to kind of have things that are little asides, sotto voce, jokes, things that he's not going to admit to himself. And I'm hoping that I can read it in a way where you'll actually sort of be able to hear those brackets. So bear with me. This is right at the start. And there it was, the crashing surf of last light, the sky shutting down for the day over the North Sea, with the herring shoals just beyond. Vin helped push out onto Scandinavian Beach, trudging toward the water's edge, heaving against a ridiculously undersized fishing vessel of foreign design and doubtful seaworthiness. This was not where he pictured himself being at 29, nearly middle-aged, and back in the place he'd fled, about to attempt this brutal toil all over again, without even the auspices of a properly sanctioned and registered fishing charter. Creeping out onto the tidal sands with Luke Blenkin and old Ned as the night seeped over the village, he felt like a housebreaker for fish, but he welcomed it. He knew he was grimacing, acting gruff and annoyed about the whole lunatic scheme, as if he were doing the old man and the boy a big favor just by being there, by having instigated this foolishness. Some perverted part of him didn't want them to know he needed this more than they did. So he made cracks about how he was going to have to spend all his earnings from the catch on a case of liniment and a truss, and japes about their dismal prospects, the doomed nature of their project. It's no matter our young friend here knows nothing about fishing, he said of Luke, the 17-year-old they roped into this venture. That's just fine, Blenkin, because we'll all drown before we can even shoot the first net. He was thinking about the pine pitch. Even old Ned Nodder, who had the most experience among them, had seemed uncertain they'd successfully sealed the hull of their strange little experimental boat in the final stages of applying pine tar. And unlike in a normal harbor, as featured in normal fishing towns, where a new boat might take on some water, but its seal could be double-checked while it was still moored to the dock, here at Skavingen, given the ridiculous conditions of the beach, the entire lack of harbor, the bomb shooting were launched straight into the crashing breakers. Untried vessels like theirs were either seaworthy or sank. Wait, Luke sounded startled. Was I supposed to? I wasn't the one who determined whether it was watertight or not, was I? That's how I'm telling it later at the tavern, Finn said. It wasn't that Luke was scatterbrained, exactly. Vin felt it was more a matter of his inability to stay focused. The young man's mind reminded Vin of a small shop he visited in Rangoon. Inside, it was just a room full of canaries, uncaged, flying this way and that. Old Ned chuckled. Don't listen to that scamp, son. This fool, when he was your age, used to tell me he would one day buy my fine bomb from me, and that thing was essentially a colander. Vin grinned as if he recalled this, which he didn't. But it hardly mattered. Even if what was left of Ned's family had not sold off, what was left of De Groot's Stare, that means the great starlets, the old fishing boat, reportedly no better than scrap after the last big storm turned half the Independence fleet into kindling, smashing them together on the beach like scattered bath toys, abandoned by a toddler who never learned. They were still too few a crew for a traditional bomb shoot, which was why they'd abandoned the standard ways, those great heaving monsters, for something downright innovative, and likely to have the same result as the Achimord practiced by those Allah-crazed insurgents he'd faced back in the jungles of Sumatra, attacking head-on for the glory of the afterlife. They had suicide attacks. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that happened back then that's very resonant now. Vin Van Winkle wasn't after that. He just wanted a decent haul of herring to earn a little money, or keep busy trying, because in truth, he was just glad to be able to make himself useful in some way, useful beyond his normal role as the Grappenmacher, providing some entertainment. It wouldn't take much effort to turn all this into a joke, an actual joke. He didn't think he would, but he could. He could put one together, if need be, about the Grootvader, the kid, and the war deserter in a boat. He didn't really think of Ned Nodder as a Grootvader, and Ned wasn't one, technically, but only because he got hitched so late. By navigating back through the fuzzy chapters in his own garbled life, Vin figured smiling Ned to be roughly 48. The man had 19 whopping years on him. Even when he'd apprenticed to him back in 1882, Ned had seemed like a well-salted mariner of the high seas.
Of course, no old salt or grandpa ever lit up the way Noddy was doing now, the three of them yipping at the sight of the sparkling surf, the miracle of moonlight mixed with water, none more so than Ned, his old friend, lately seemed alive in a way he hadn't in months, at least when he stayed awake. At moments, like tonight, as he hooted into the wind on this long, familiar stretch of beach, Vin thought he could just stay here, that no one would be looking for him. After the magazine explosion in his garrison in Acha, they probably just counted him among the dead and missing. He wondered sometimes if he had died. Maybe that was what was happening here, why he returned to Scheveningen in The Hague, or at least thought he had returned. But no, Zev Kloot and Harm van Donk and numerous other local oafs were here too. If this was the afterlife, those clowns would not be permitted in either heaven or the other. So, I'm going to read another little one. It's a little later, pushing out into the sea. There's a vocabulary at the beginning for things like that word that means grandfather. This is again Vin, and he's starting to really enjoy this moment. Fighting the sea, the crash and wash, rushing the waves, walking out to the shoals, the boat sleek with her shallow draft, it all made Vin grin. He knew his two friends assumed it was because he was an adventurer, a bold shit stirrer, in love with chaos. But it wasn't the buck and roll hitting the breakers. It was the way it drowned the other sound in his ears, the rattle of bamboo stirred by wind, the creak of its rushed growth when the heat lay unbearably still, the purr and pad of jungle cats, true tigers and sunda-clouded leopards, or their counterfeit, insurgents in disguise. Creeping closer, more deadly than the actual cat, about to lurch forward and commit Achamord, to take them all down with them. Huzzah, huzzah, he shouted at the darkening North Sea as it sassed their new little boat, which was already beautiful, a humdinger, a dandy, a devil of a thing. Is she Yar? Young Blanken shouted, peering fore and aft, scanning all points. I can't tell. Tell me she's fine, right? We're doing it? We're doing it. Vin slapped the boy in the back, opting not to tease him for loading on the nautical terms he certainly only learned in the shanties he liked to sing. Right, Noddy? Old Ned nodded to the last scar of sunset. We're doing something. So this story followed these three men in their joint adventure in close third-person bits like that for each character. But it's not chronological. Instead, it's told in the order of the phrases that occur in the poem as the poem goes through. So each line triggers the telling of these scenes, all out of order. Each line from the poem titles the chapter and then follows through on the headers of each page to kind of remind you where you are. So that's the cohesive thing that holds the chapter together. It's a little complicated. So if the line in that chapter is the old man laughed and sang a song, scenes in that chapter could be from all over the place chronologically, but they might involve the moon or something old or laughter or, in this case, song. In this scene, I'm going to read now from Vin, describing the haunting native song that's still in his head. It's all marked clearly. These days, for Vin, or nights mostly, there was always a song, or chant, or clang whirring away in his head. In the jungle, even in the relative safety of the fort, but especially in a rotten canvas bivouac shelter, when the shoeless music started up, the bamboo flute and melodic diphthonging drums of the Toba Batak, it made you want to get up and start swinging the kleewangs. That's a kind of a bent sword. Expanding the clearing, slashing. Any paltry stick of flora that could provide cover for those sneaky bastards seemed to be mocking them. It got to where Vin could feel even a strangler fig, scrawny as a rope, was taunting them. He shared a shelter with another corporal from Assen named De Groot, who had the runs one night and made several trips to the trench, the train, later and later, until he just didn't return. They found him about a week later while out on patrol, nailed to a rubber tree with bamboo splints. The visits to the pipe dens began soon after, whenever Vin got liberty. In the larger cities out there, it was hard not to recognize the neighborhoods built on the poppy, though it was said the Sultan disapproved. Even in the sticks, Vin could scrounge up at least the weedier smoke, Matic. The rebels they fought in denunciations to their Mohammedan followers claimed to abhor it too, but the truth was they were all on every side, profiting from the trade on every level and in every way. To stand there in the dark, wishing for more moon, in the throes of that jangly jungle chime with a sweat bead chilling your neck, and tell yourself it was only your own sweat there, not the first bite of the blade of a rechong, rebels sliding from the leafy shadows. That was a feat all its own. Never mind not escaping to the pipe dens. Never mind after closing your eyes easily, ever closing your eyes easily at night ever again. He wanted to get so far away from there that home, 8,000 nautical miles away, began to seem not even far enough. Back home, he figured. And then keep going, keep going. And the chant in his head helped drown out some of the clang of the Toba Batak. The second fisherman is a young guy, Luke Blinken, 17. He's born to a wealthy whaling company family that's just had a huge financial crisis scandal that everybody's upset about. And so he's suddenly poor. He writes verse and wants to be a troubadour and is kind of trying to slum it in the fishing village, mostly because he's in love with Imko, the girl, this young girl there. Luke's scattered and confused. To play off the word blinking, he kind of can't, he doesn't focus on things well. We'd probably say he has ADHD now, for one thing. But he also doesn't have a self-awareness. He can't see himself. Like he's not a bad songwriter, but he can't sing. So because he's so, his speech is so chopped up, all of his sections have end dashes throughout them. Sometimes they even just end with an end dash. So I'll read some very short ones here from Luke. This is from a title, And What Do You Wish? The Old Moon Asked the Three. So here the title, maybe pick it out. One thing Luke Blinken wished, like crazy, was that he wasn't probably going to have to visit an optician. Spectacles wouldn't do, not for performing his songs. He'd look like one of those university beer cantus groups over at Leiden, goggle-eyed, sloshing a mug in time to the mob racket, swaying to the beat of some worn-out tune in the student hall. They'd run right out of the tavern. He could see the moon just fine. He couldn't say if it was doing the talking. It appeared crisp and defined and didn't seem to have a mouth. Peering over the gunwale, looking down, he could only make out a darkness and a glittery stirring there. But he couldn't say if it was flickering moonlight or fish or constellations. The family doctor, Goodcoop, had been saying for some time that he wasn't properly seeing things up close. Luke did fine naming the items on the shelves on the far side of his examination room. Maybe it was true that reading was becoming a blur, but he was pretty sure he didn't have this other thing, hyperopia, whatever that was. 17 was too young to have a big disease. You know what it is. And the rise and fall, herky-jerky of the boat, that wasn't helping him. At school, for a time, they just thought he was thick and couldn't read. Uncle Allard still thought that. But then Luke started composing ballads, and his mama decided he couldn't be a ninny. He tried to explain that though he managed to scribble down notes for these ballads, the lyrics, the musical key, maybe the tempo, mostly he worked them out in his head. In fact, it seemed to be one of the few things that didn't jounce around in his noggin like an egg in a milk pail, his lyrics. His best guess was it was because the lyrics were, for the most part, inspired by Imka Holt, who'd been 2 grades ahead of him in school, 2 pews ahead of him at church, and now, since her father took sick or something, worked at the hotel and tavern, and his favorite cafe. Her he could see, and everywhere. It wasn't just the ideas in his head, of course. He tended to bounce around himself. He knew that. His mama had always been on him about that, for as far back as he could remember, or at least until the small hairs had started, and the catty stink in his pits. He liked to think his mind had wandered less back then in boyhood, but Mamie thought his mind would stay focused if he first organized his activities. "You're doing too many things at once," she cautioned constantly. "You're too scattered." And this was only his lovely mood of chiming in. If Uncle Allard had gotten wind of many of these activities, that they were shoveling small amounts of household funds toward lessons and such things, his uncle would have considered unfocused at best and foolish and, at worst, reason enough to kick them out of his home. Certainly he would call him worse things than scattered. For months now, though only Mamie knew, Thursday nights were supposed to find him trekking into Westende Street in The Hague and taking his accordion instruction. Except, at some earlier point, many months back, he witnessed Imke Holt flirting and smiling with a grinning crew of herring men, asking about when the season would start, whose bombs were repaired and ready, and so now he was out here in the North Sea, or possibly high in the air over it? The twinkle of scaling and long gone behind him, fussing with nets. So Mamie would call that, and his entire schedule this week, for that matter, unfocused, disorganized. True, but that's that one. There's one of those M dashes. So here's another little bit of Luke. This has some sort of oath in it in Dutch, kind of a Jesus, that kind of thing. It could just be sea foam clouding up on the dark water, witching the moonlight, creating an optical illusion. It was possible it wasn't clouds drifting below their boat, wasn't it? To make things even more perplexing, there seemed to be, in the breaks between what could or could not be the clouds, a glow down there. More toward what he was pretty sure was southeast, right where the heart of the Hague lay, where the gaslit street lamps would be glowing. Luke decided it could simply be a school of some sort of phosphorescent fish. He'd read of such things, jellyfish, krill, some of the coral, plankton, but the glowing below was only in that one spot where the Hague would be, just inland from the coast, just east of the Kurhaus, if they were, in fact, Hadiasis, floating high above it all. If it was the Kurhaus down there, and not some horrible bottom feeder fish, his Imke would be there soon, if he had his schedule correct. She worked in the laundry in the basement of the great glowing resort, but also on certain nights, after finishing up at the tavern or Dirty Ned's place, she was reporting back to the Kurhaus to assist the baker, preparing breakfast rolls and fresh bread for the new day. For Luke, it helped a little, maybe, to think of his plans regarding Imke as akin to the way they'd arrived here tonight out in the dark blue vastness. He wasn't so great with the normal ways you courted a girl, the talking to her part, the getting to know her, all that. But their unusual little boat, their plan to get around the normal constraints of the whole enterprise of herring fishing, wasn't that a bit like what he was going to do by winning her over with his music? Getting around his personal shortcomings, including even the recent sullying of his family name, and including personally knowing neither tip nor toe about either herring or fishing? The other fellows out there his age didn't have that sort of grand scheme. Either a way to reach the herring shoals with 3 ill-fit men and a small craft, or anything remotely nearing an enlightened approach, one that required neither social or financial standing nor personal elan to reach that local wonder, that unreachable shoal all to herself, Imke Holt. So, I'm going to give one little more thing about Vin, and then I'm going to tell you about how this all occurred. By the way, the Kurhaus is still there. The place is no longer high-rise resorts, but that it's looks like a golden mosque, interestingly, and I think the Rolling Stones played there in the 70s. So this scene is again Vin, the war deserter, who's back in his old village, and he's homeless. He doesn't have an address. Because of the PTSD, he prefers not to sleep at night, so he sleeps where he can. And this falls under the heading of "Where are you going?" This is that chapter that says that. Where are you going? Where are you going? Was what Vin said out loud when he ran into Imke Holt near the Kurhaus late one night, some months back, maybe in the previous fall. It came out all wrong. He meant to say, you're young Luke's sweetheart now, aren't you? But he wasn't at his best that evening. In fact, he saw in a flash that the familiarity he'd just shown had been a miscalculation, based not on his actual knowledge of the young lady, but only on the fact that Blinken had been bleeding her name like a calf for the last few months, from at least the planing and draw shading stage on. But that was while they're still building the boat. But that didn't make her someone he, Vin, knew well enough to address in such a direct manner. Noting the uniform, he tried again. How are things at the Majid? That's like the mosque. Pardon? The Kerr house. Are you working there as well? Unless she kept getting discharged from one job after another, this would make at least 3 that he knew of, having seen her working as a barmaid at the tavern, plus waitressing at one other place. Just started this week, she said. What did you call it? It was a personal joke, referring to the new monstrosity behind them as the Majid Raya Bataraman, the replacement mosque back in Kudaraja. This glitzy resort, with its bulbous roof like a grand teat offered to the sky, had suffered through a fire back in '85 and been rebuilt. And similarly, the Majid had also been a reconstruction. It was an appeasement his fellow countrymen threw up after first invading and razing the original holy place, thinking, incorrectly, that it was the seat of the Sultan's power, designed by an Italian in the style of India for some reason. The new one back there was also an eyeful, plopped down as if from the heavens, just like this thing on the beach. It actually appeared while he was away in the actual war. He shrugged. The Kerr house? She studied him a little too closely, he felt, to be justified by even the dimness of the moonlight. Are you all right, Vin van Winkle? Vinken, or Vin, Vink. Meneer van Winkle, if you must. That means Mr. I think I like Vinken from you. My stodgy father and his ilk stick by Vinland. There was a grand moon behind her, and he felt for a moment they were all some metropolitan promenade, Edison lit, where no one ever slept. My late mother, on the other hand, called me Vinky, unless that's to, let's say, she said, that it definitely is. But indeed, yeah, I am more than all right. In fact, he wasn't feeling the stomach cramps today, or any of the fluctuating ailments of the pipe den. And he was certain she didn't know him well enough to notice, even if it had been showing. Like a dream, that's how I am. Kind of you to ask. How are the big tippers there? She shrugged. They're big tippers? Those who are? I don't interact with the guests enough to see any tips, really. He'd always felt Kerr House was an odd name for these grand resorts. The idea of taking the cure here at the seaside. He couldn't imagine anybody who could afford to stay there having anything really in need of curing. He held out his arm for her. Come, I will escort you home. At this hour, sending you out into the dark streets, there could be orangutans about. She giggled. So far I've encountered no orangutans, but I have only been at this job 1 week. Where I was, he told her, there were orangutans, which was a lot to tell her. More on the subject than he normally divulged. And he recognized that he was saying it like it was another joke, and that he declined to tell her the rest. That when you encountered one lurking in the trees, you would be relieved to discover it was only an orangutan. She insisted he not bother walking her unless it was on his way. He said it was, even though that wasn't accurate, since his loose plan was to probably go to a public park, maybe the Malleyveld, where his mother used to take him, back when he could barely walk, tottering around even more than he was tonight. And then he'd try to sleep in some sheltered edge of the great lawn under the morning stars for at least a little, what was left of the night. But he didn't tell her that. He just mumbled, my place is right around here. He didn't think he always yelped in his sleep now, not every time, but parks were a good place not to cause a ruckus and sleep in peace. If a pipe den wasn't easily available, or he just didn't want to disappear for most of the day. He wasn't certain where they were heading exactly, but she kept on the Strandweg, that's like the boardwalk that runs along the ocean, heading north along the beach. He didn't remember there being a lot of homes up that way. It was mostly herring pickling and packaging outfits in that direction. He told her some nonsense about their good luck tonight, since orangutans were known to shy away from the full moon. They were not, but it was something to say. Or the old moon, I should say. The what now, she asked. Since she bit, he told her, even my father, who was a renowned expert on all the heavens, he's the director of the observatory up in Leiden, an astronomer. Just ask him if you doubt that, has no answer for this simple question. Why is it a new moon at the start of the month, but not an old moon later on? Is that even fair? And by extension, are we so afraid of old age that we'd rather say we're full than old? Do you feel old or do you feel full? That's the limit of the options you're offering me, is it? I know the sly undercut, believe me in this. I feel that I'm both, old and full. Not so old, she said. You're my sister's age, I believe. Cokie Holt? Cokie Bunk now. She remembers you. Ah, yes, he said. Cokie. Yet another one. Still yet another. His heart nearly broke thinking on it. There was a time when even women as fantastic as Cokie Holt had barely drawn his gaze. What a tragedy that so much of your life is wasted on youth, the refuge of the dim-witted and callous. And then, just like that, looming directly before them, it was she in a cowl, the big hood and lantern making her look like the Grim Reaper, only lovely, still lovely. The former Cokie Holt, foul disapproval on her face, but lovely all the same. Little sister, she said, in a way that seemed to Vin to both chide Imka for walking alone at this hour, and to purposefully and perversely ignore the man who was ensuring that Imka wasn't walking alone. It was a barrelful of implication to squeeze into 2 words, but she managed it. He debated whether he should speak up and explain that he was merely escorting Imka in proxy on behalf of her beau and his friend, and soon-to-be fishing partner, Luke Blenkin. Relax, mother, Imka said, mocking her sister. Not a child, Cokie. I'm sure I can handle a few orangutans and an old and bloated moon. For a moment, as her kid sister continued on ahead, Cokie glared back at him, as if he were clearly both of those things the younger one had named. So I'm going to detour just for a little bit and tell you, I'm going to get back and read to you about the third guy, but I want to tell you about the genesis of this. Much of this book is about the night. It's a nocturne, but it's also about second chances and redemption. And what's interesting is it makes the history of the writing of this very ironic. Maybe 2008, there was some big name flu, like a pandemic, bird flu or N1 something, and I had it. And I was flat out down in Ann Arbor. I was flat out on the hearth in front of our fire, sweating in front of the fire, just writing it out. And I write every day, not well, but I have to write every day. I wrote the day my son Huck was born. I wrote the day I got married to my wife Cheryl, and so I was just making myself write some nonsense in this little blue notebook I use occasionally, and I started thinking about what sort of public domain thing is there that you could expand on and really turn into something else. And I thought of this, maybe because I was so sleepy and whatever, I thought I went completely nod, and I started writing down just some basic notes about possible personalities to work around these names and what they would need. Need is very important in building a character. It's where you start, really. And I thought, for example, that Nod, whatever his name that would become Nod, would be an older man who has sleep disorders, and he can't support his young family. He can't fish anymore with the big cruise because he has narcolepsy and it's dangerous, and he sleepwalks and leaves the house, and he has prescient dreams, he believes. Those kind of raw strokes for about 5 or 6 pages of this book, of this notebook. And then I got better, and I folded into my normal routine, writing on my computer up into file, and over time, working on other things, I had about 40 to 70 pages of notes, but mostly raw scenes and things. And, just kept alternating working on it and other things. And then in 2013, 2 Michigan writers, the recently late Jack Driscoll and Bonnie Jo Campbell, got me invited out to Pacific to teach for the first time. And it was great. But you teach every other day, and so my day off, I opened the computer and thought, I'm going to write a story about Rasputin today. So I started, and I got about a sentence in, and it went, because you don't write about Rasputin. But the computer just died. And I thought, oh, what a drag, and I got to get into the computer and probably have the tech people clean out the hard drive. And I got a loaner from the school techs, and they worked on it for a week, and they said, this is beyond us. You're going to have to send it to a clean room. And I didn't know what that was. Out in California, where they dress up in like those Wonka Vision suits, you know, all in white, and it would probably cost about $10,000. I sent it to them because I didn't know what was on there, and I'm just obsessed. I don't want to lose anything. And it came back, free, no cost, no charge. We couldn't get a thing off of it. This is the most dead thing they've ever seen. They said, hang on to it because technology in the future, it's like Walt Disney's body or something. But hang on to it. So I thought, like, oh, that's weird. And then I started thinking, what did I miss? I had to figure out what was on there. I lost a lot of poems that I wrote about my son Huck when he was a baby, which I think were pretty good, actually. But I thought, oh, that Dutch book. But I must have printed out some of that somewhere. It must be somewhere. I'm just so messy. I've got so much clutter. I'll find it. It'll be printed out or on a thumb drive. And I worked on other things, and I ignored it for several years. So then we get 4 more years. It's 2017, and in March there was a big windy storm that went through all the Midwest, and it knocked out all power everywhere. I don't know if you remember that. I think you guys were fine up here. And I was in the dark, freezing with candles and yellow pads, thinking, what can I write that I don't have to go online and do anything? And I thought of this, and I thought, I'm never going to find those pages. I'm just going to take those old notebooks with the 5 pages of notes. I'm going to start the Dutch book again from scratch. And because you're in the dark and the cold, it's 1889, and it's a time machine. Turning off the lights, it's a bathtub is a time machine too. So I wrote for several days, and then the power came on, and I retired to the bathtub, and I have sometimes write on a board in there, and just gangbusters. I knocked this thing out. I gave it to my editor, Deb Garrison, at Pantheon, and she loved it. She said, honestly, I've honestly not ever really ever read a book like this. The way it's built, it's just it's different. We're going to need every vote we can get upstairs. So let's work on this and polish it for like a year. So we did secretly, and then I pretended to submit it. And she'd already worked on it with me for a long time. And we just missed the vote. They loved it, but they said, this is like an independent book. This is a small press book. So I went with a small press, came out last year. I love the cover. You don't get the same kind of distribution or notice. It's difficult to get people to even know you have a book out. It's been a long time since I've had one. And then in the fall, I was up here and I got an email from my wife who said she was cleaning out the china cabinet and found a thumb drive and it was on there. But I looked at those pages and I'm much happier with the tone of this. It changed. It was good that I started over. Anyway, very much about redemption, this book. And that story is strangely a key part of it. So I'm going to quickly read a little bit about Ned. As I mentioned, Ned Nutter is either 48 or 49, I can't remember, but it's the average life expectancy back then. He's the old man, believe it or not. His sections, because he has all these sleep things, and because he's just kind of got an agreeable rhythm, are ellipses, which some people say call ... and then I scowl at them. But makes some sense, right? So the first little bit is way at the end, but it occurs early in the story because it's out of order. And it's an uncharacteristic moment with Ned where he's uncharacteristically pessimistic, and you see a little bit of his wonderful wife. And then I'll read you about how he met his wife. And this is its own little chapter, it's 1 page. And the name of the chapter is, But I Shall Name You the Fishermen Three, Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod. Let me lay out the entire roster of our illustrious herring crew, Ned said one night to his love after a couple slugs of Henneveer, and after they'd lost several days of work the night before, when the Caucasian wignut wood they'd been trying to cut into thwarts started to exhibit disappointing checking along the grain. They're building out the shed behind them. She was changing the boy as he took stock of the state of the wild-eyed project they were up to out in his shed. He took the youngest and rocked her mid-grouse, being the resident expert at putting them down, according to Fenna. 3 in total, count 'em, dear. First, good old Noddy, whom no one will fish with on account of he slips off to slumberland if the wind blows steady. She shot him the look, but he kept going. Vinken Van Winkle, who fished for herring for all of 2 seasons 6 years back, and now seems to be receiving ongoing updates of military movements in Atcha in his head, as well as some other demons, probably. Young Luke Blanken, who's green as they come and whose family name's considered sullied by everyone, and Skin again, whose occupation is the sea, though that doesn't stop him from writing songs about the sea. So in case you're wondering how I think we're fair, I think that's your answer. Hush, she said. I don't believe that's how you really feel. Just in case you're wondering, he said, tossing into the stove a hunk of timber, the wingnut wood they'd abandoned last night. Careful so as not to stir the baby girl now deep asleep in the crook of his other arm. Or in case you need all the names for an obituary notice. She flared. Stop it, Ned Nodder. That Vinken is rubbing off on you, hiding how you really feel like that. I know you secretly have high hopes. He gave her his own look. Well, she conceded, medium height hopes then. But enough with the Vinken-style wisecracks. I'm not telling you not to work with the man. I think you both can help each other, but you're not him. You don't hide behind sarcasm and grumbling. You're the man who decides something is fine and right and will be so, and you put on a smile and it is so. She had him hand her the sleeping baby so he could work his magic on the boy. I need you to keep being that man, she told him. We need you to be that man. So they're really living subsistence in a farmhouse before he gets together with his old friends. So here's this last one, and then I'll take questions. Hopefully I didn't go too long. Number 8. So the title here is, "And What Do You Wish?" the old moon asked the 3. Getting married was never anything Ned had wished for. Bachelor fisherman would have been fine, he thought. Bachelor farmer when the herring boats became impractical for him. This was just one reason he knew his union made little sense to folks in the village market, or when he brought his little brood to church, though he was sure they knew the story by now. The whispering and clucking that fluttered around them like chickens in the dooryard. Back then, when it was all fresh, had long since subsided, but certainly they all still recalled the rumors. Ned never gave a hang about that, except that it likely bothered dear Fenna. She deserved better treatment from the wags and fence-line gossips, and better yet in terms of husband material. He was more than old enough to be her father. When the lads on the beach and in the taverns, initially for a time, chose to josh and make their jakes, along the lines of him being a cradle robber and lecher, he let it go, though, or pretended he hadn't heard them, or even, once or twice, faked one of his dozing spells. You couldn't be hurt by snickering or chortles if you were not awake to hear. But the truth was, he hadn't been a leering suitor, not at all. In fact, immediately after the strange encounter that ended his bachelorhood, he had trouble recalling ever laying eyes on her before. At least not with any particular lingering. He'd known her folks, of course, though only by name, maybe to nod to her father passing in his cart. But Fenna, though a vision, sure, fair-haired and lovely, hadn't been in his sights, wouldn't have been, couldn't have been. What it was, the culprit in this, was the sleepwalking. His night wanderings, as he thought of them, were an embarrassment at least, a shock upon waking, an inconvenience, and uncomfortable, though sometimes he made it into bedrooms. And that's how he found himself, preposterously in his early 40s, waking up next to a beautiful, astonished young lady. The corn silk hair in the bright light through a garden window was the first thing that was clear, but then the girl, the consternation. He was still in his work clothes and lying on top of the counterpane, and yet that didn't seem to assuage the girl's parents, standing in the doorway of her tiny bedroom, nor the girl's younger sister covering her face, cowering in the adjoining trundle bed. He proposed marriage that afternoon before finally exiting their house, having sat with the father for hours at their kitchen table, negotiating. He hadn't laid a finger on the girl, they both swore, and her father seemed to believe them. But there was the issue of the neighbors, the community. The man was insistent in a way that surprised Ned a little. Couldn't he simply knock on a few of the neighbors' doors and explain what had happened? That he'd been sleepwalking? People, he found, were generally very pleasant. Wouldn't they understand? Mainly, he was thinking of the girl, concerned she could do a lot better than an old herring man like him, one who sometimes couldn't end the night in the same bed where he started it. But the father was adamant. Of course, he didn't regret it. He never planned to marry. But if he were going to do it, it would be hard to imagine landing a wife quite so lovely and young. And though she didn't seem particularly unhappy all these years later, it was hard sometimes not to feel a little sorry for her, as well as hopeful in an odd way, that he might find some way, someday, to make it up to her, to compensate her for the intrusion and the inconsiderate turn he'd done her in making her Mefrau Ned Nodder. And so, that's it.
If anybody has any questions for Steve, go ahead.
Is there a specific reason that you chose to expand on Dutch history using sort of the locations and the war and stuff?
Yeah, I decided to trap myself by the publication date of the original Dutch lullaby, written in St. Louis, by a lot of Eugene Fields and people of that ilk. I think he wrote a bunch of them. He probably had a French one. He probably had very corny Dutch stuff, But I decided, okay, what if, let's just say it's 1889, because you could then play with the idea. I didn't push it in this. I didn't state it in this, but the reader might play with the idea that this scenario was sort of in the ether at that moment. And so quick research told me that the place for herring fishing was Scheveningen Beach. And 1889, what was happening then, I started looking up things. There was a very crazy king who was hated academia and thinking, and he was known as Crazy Willie. And I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, the most prominent research pushed me toward it. And then I saw how they really did fishing, and it was fascinating. They now have a marina there. If you look at a lot of the Dutch masters, they're often of Scheveningen Beach. And that famous Van Gogh painting that was stolen is the beach at Scheveningen, and the storm is, or maybe it's called Storm at Scheveningen. And so he makes an appearance in here. He goes down there and he's with them. When they were younger, he was one summer they were sort of apartment mates, because this was earlier before he had anyone, but he did it then. So that painting's still missing, but they have pictures of it. It could have been the cover of the book. But there's also some local masters there that are more well known there that have incredible pictures of these giant bone shoes. And there was one that was done. You can go online and find bootleg videos of this panoramic painting of Scheveningen, and you go back and you see the Hague in the back, because you can see like a church steeple. But it's from about 1886, and it's still there in a building. You pay to go in, and you can see these videos where people have snuck in. They've restored it, and there's a circular kind of board. They have sand in there, so it's a time machine. They play sounds of the sea. Meanwhile, outside, it's like tons of throngs of tourists from all over the land taking pictures and riding bicycles and parasailing, and there's giant skyscraper hotels, and it's just destroyed. But you go in there, and you can see the bomb shoot, and you can hear the thing, and you look all around, and it's 1886 in this little village. So that really hooked me into being able to see this place. So that was fascinating. But yeah, I kind of made myself make it the same year. And then the actual war went on for many years, but that was something new I learned about. They were just the KNIL, the Dutch army, and they were brutal colonial fighting forces that just destroyed a lot of what's now Indonesia. It was awful, but it was scary, crazy stuff, and they fought back in ways that were, very scary too. But it all just felt very modern. It was amazing. Any other questions? Yeah, Dan.
Are you planning on doing a collection of your short stories?
That's the one thing I need to do before I'm gone. And I thought it would be the first thing that ever happened, because that's the thing I've had the most success with. I mean, over the course of 40 years, okay, and short story collections come out and they've barely been in anything. And I've been in magazines that are kind of legendary and gone now, some of them, but some of them are so old that I even wonder if they could do that. I want to do that, but I want to do it in a way that's really seen, that's not just a really small press. Yeah, it's been funny when I teach, because people will say like, well, you just know novels, and I have to say like, I don't know novels. Nobody really knows how to write a novel. Everyone's different. They're like snowflakes, but I know how to write a short story in my sleep, and I really want to do that. Have you read any of my short stories?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we were talking earlier, and now I'm super curious. So.
Yeah. Yeah, but they were in some good places. And, my editor at Pantheon said she thinks my short stories, I don't know if this is true and I should limit this, but they have more of a male sensibility and the novels appeal to women. It's just a different animal. I love the immediate conflict of a short story. And I feel that I'm really good at running story workshops and being able to spot how a story should go and everything. It's because I just see conflict everywhere. I'm just an anxious creature. Let's not mess around. Let's focus on this. But great fun. And I think I had a lot of really, when I was younger, I think I had more subversive kind of influences, your Vonnegut's and things like that, and T.C. Boyle. People that I don't read that much now, but yeah, I would love to. Right now, it might be a real historical document, almost with some kind of apologia about there was a different time when people could write about anything they wanted, and they didn't have to have sensitivity readers. Anyway, I do hope that happens soon, and before not posthumously, let's hope.
Mm-hmm.
If there are any publishers out there that want to do a collection, I'd love to. Other questions?
So, you organized the book by the verses in the nursery rhyme? Right?
Yeah, basically by motif.
By motif. Were you ever? Was the book ever done chronologically, or was that the plan all along to do it that way?
I think the plan to do it that way was pretty early on.
Okay.
Let me think. It was pretty early on. I think I attempted to write these scenes somewhat chronologically, but as those prompts came along, and then they all got moved around. There were a couple places I just fixed them and I changed some language and I shoved it in where it needed to be.
Okay.
Because an editor said, it's basically edited twice. An editor said, I think we need to see this a lot sooner. We need to know this a lot sooner. I tend to write novels that way, like things I can see as I see them, and I kind of generally know where they are. So the thing will have a lot of gaps, and then down somewhere later, the order is roughly the order, and there's big white gaps. Because finishing a novel to me is just finally seeing all of it. You kind of have gray areas and then become different as the characters become more crisp.
All right.
All right. Thank you
Well,
very much.
thank you
for
so
having me.
much, Steve. And Dana's back here. If you're interested in any of Steve's books, we have some back there for sale, so help yourself.